The time is exactly 19 after 9, and we are now joined by Chad Thomas. He's the CEO at IRS Forensic Investigations, and we are going to be talking about the arrest of an alleged kidnapping kingpin wanted for cases where ransom demands were made in Mozambique. A very good morning to you, Chad. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, Julie, and compliments of the new year to you.
Thank you indeed, and the very same to you and your loved ones. Do hope it's going to be a better year than last year for all of us. So, Chad, let's look at the story, and I'm kind of wondering, how does this link in with the spate of kidnappings we've had in South Africa, very high-profile kidnappings in South Africa as well? Is there a link at all, or are these two totally separate cases?
Well, firstly, I think it's a great way to have kicked off the new year, having such a high-profile arrest. When the kidnapping for ransom started in the past couple of years, we always knew there was a link back to Mozambique. We knew that it was a syndicated crime. We knew that the modus operandi was very similar to that what was used in Mozambique. And we saw these crimes being committed from Mahikeng through to Umbombela, through to Polokwane. Eventually they spread to places like Laudium, Lenasia, Fordsburg, and then it became a free-for-all. What we identified at that time was that the kidnapping syndicates were linked to other syndicates in other countries. What we also realized is that because kidnapping for ransom was becoming so well publicized in South Africa, that these syndicates were either franchising it to local syndicates or there were a lot of copycats. The copycats were far more amateur in the way in which they executed the kidnappings, and we saw a lot of arrests of the lower tier type members. This arrest is a remarkable arrest because this person is wanted internationally. It was a joint project by our crime intelligence team at South African Police Services, who have set up a specific kidnapping unit. And all those role players did an absolutely incredible job. And as an investigator sitting on the periphery looking in, I can only say that if this is the way our members are going to be acting in 2023, there's a strong possibility that we're going to start turning the tide against organized crime.
That's absolute wonderful news. Now, I've also noticed that that SAPS put out a notification regarding this case. And in this instance, they've actually named the alleged kidnapper. I'm wondering why. And because it's out in the public domain already, am I allowed to mention his name on radio?
It was done via a media release at the SAPS newsroom, so you can name him. And they did post a picture of him, and bizarrely, his features were cut out. But some of the stuff that was shared on social media, you could actually see his face. The reason they would normally hide his face and his name is if they intended to have identity parades. But the police themselves have named him in their media release, so I don't foresee a problem in naming him on radio.
Okay, so he's 50-year-old Ismail Malude Ramos Nangi. What more do we know about him? I presume he is a Mozambican national. What more would we know about this man?
So what's very important is that if you look at the years in which he's been operating, it's the years in which kidnapping for ransom started to become a massive problem across border as well. He was identified as far back as 2018 as being a transnational kidnap for ransom kingpin. So what does that mean if we break it down? Kingpin means he's the top tier leadership. He does the planning. He benefits the most. Transnational means that although he was initially wanted in Mozambique, he's been involved in kidnappings that are cross-border involving other jurisdictions. So from the perspective of where he stands in the structures, he stands at the very top. And I think the reason they've named him is to show the foot soldiers, if we could get this chap that you thought was untouchable for the last 5 years, well, then we're coming for you.
Okay, you use the word transnational. I'm going to ask you to unpack that for me. Does it mean just across borders in South Africa, or does it go across borders internationally. And also, he was arrested in South Africa at an upmarket estate in Centurion. Um, so let's look at those situations. And adding to that, I believe that the Randburg, he's going to appear at before the Randburg Magistrates Court on Monday. I don't know if it was this past Monday or is it the coming Monday. And the whole idea there is to get extradition processes in place. I'm wondering why they're extraditing him, where they're going to extradite him to, and because Interpol was involved as well, shouldn't he be extradited to the place where most of his crimes were committed and where the harshest possible sentence would be served?
So let's break down your question, because you started off by asking about the transnational aspect. We've gone through to the court, and now we're looking at the aspects pertaining to whether or not he should be extradited, where he should be extradited to. So the Interpol arrest warrant was via Mozambique. So Mozambique authorities issued an arrest warrant, approached their local Interpol office. The Interpol then issued a red notice. Through intelligence-driven investigations from July in South Africa, according to the South African Police Services, their intelligence component started to actively hunt this man down in different provinces, looking to find where he was, who he was cohabiting with, and who was involved in the syndicate. Eventually, they obviously identified the place where he was, surveillance was conducted, and then the takedown occurred. Because the warrant of arrest originated in Mozambique, he will have to be extradited to Mozambique. It means that the majority of the cases against him are Mozambique-related cases. However, should they find that the cases in South Africa are directly linked to him, there may be an opportunity for the South African authorities to want to try him locally prior to him being extradited. Whether that happens or not, we don't know. It's an order in which the authorities, together with the international community of law enforcement, have to discuss. He may be extradited to Mozambique, stand trial there, serve a sentence there, be extradited back to South Africa and stand trial here for any crimes that may have been committed on South African soil. Alternatively, if you look at the Kretcher case, instead of extraditing Kretcher to the Czech Republic, he was tried locally and found guilty locally, and he's in prison in South Africa, although the Czech Republic wanted him extradited. So it's a very interesting case. So we're going to see it unfolding over the next couple of days while we see the different court appearances, because he would have had to appear in court yesterday. It would have been postponed so that everybody can get their ducks in a row and there can be further investigation. And he'll most probably be in court next week, Monday again. So it'll be 7 days for further investigation. And then we'll understand fully what the state's determination is, whether they're going to fight to keep him here or whether they're going to make him Mozambique's problem. But to go back to your first question about transnational crime, we've experienced kidnap for ransom in the Southern African region now for most probably 2 decades. It started in Mozambique, it spread up to Tanzania. We saw a lot of links between drug syndicates, terror syndicates. We saw a lot of the money from the kidnap for ransom that flowed from Tanzania and Mozambique going to Lahore in Pakistan and to Afghanistan across the border. So from a transnational perspective, this is an international syndicate. We then saw, as our police was hollowed out during the capture years, these guys became far more bravado, and they decided, well, let's start in South Africa. We know they were very active for many years in Mozambique, but South Africa was off limits because the assumption was we had a very well-functioning police force. And let me say this is indicative that we do in fact have a well-functioning police force. The police force was hollowed out during the capture years, but that doesn't mean we don't have members who are willing. It just means that their resources and infrastructure has been limited. We're hoping with this dispensation that's currently in power that they're going to take the outlook that by funding and providing resources and infrastructure to our police, they can recapacitate them. And we'll see a lot more successful arrests like this, and hopefully prosecutions linked to it.
Okay, so Chad, I think the whole of South Africa have been following all of the kidnapping cases very, very closely over time, because you kind of know the people or the families involved in these kidnappings. And I know the Moti case, the four brothers, that truly caught the public's imagination. And ever since then, we've all been following this very, very closely. Do you think that because these kidnapping cases has been given such high profile in the news, in media, that it has kind of stopped, or the kidnappers are not as brazen as they used to be, or is it still carrying on and we're just not hearing about it, or that the profiles of the victims is not actually that big, so it's not being splashed all across the news?
So it's all of the above. So what's happened in South Africa is we had people that copied the modus operandi. We call them copycats. And then there were syndicates that were linked to the main syndicate that franchised out. They used the same modus operandi, and they would pay a fee for being able to use that modus operandi. With the copycats, we've seen a lot of kidnap for ransom of normal, average South Africans. We've seen in informal settlements, kidnappings occur where they ask for 2,000 Rand, 5,000 Rand. Then, of course, we see high-profile cases where they're asking for tens of millions of Rand. The Moti case captured our hearts because it was a family of young boys, and that was absolutely horrific. But it also focused the attention of the public on the threat that kidnapping was becoming in South Africa. So kidnapping hasn't stopped, and this isn't going to stop kidnapping. A lot of kidnapping goes unreported because the families cooperate, and there's the person that's been kidnapped has been released. In a lot of other instances, there are kidnappings that are taking place where the police are involved, but it's not making it into the media because it's not as high profile in terms of value, in terms of who the individual or individuals are. But it doesn't mean that we must put our guard down. We have to be aware of what's going on, and we have to understand that kidnap for ransom has proven to be a very, very viable tool in the whole tool case of organized crime. And the fact that they were willing to move it across border into South Africa where there's a lot of money, and they were targeting individuals that were involved in business where there's a lot of cash, doesn't mean they're going to stop because one kingpin's been taken down.
Of course, that indicates that there's a lot of inside information that is probably being exchanged for money, for people that work for you, or possibly even family members. You can't discount that. But having said that, what sort of sentences can we expect when these kidnappers are caught, when these perpetrators are caught? Because my thinking is that the harshest sentences should be imposed on them, because I think it's such a heinous crime, and also that it would send out a very, very strong message to other copycats and would-be kidnappers.
So in respect to the way these kidnapping syndicates operate, you're 100% right. They need to have the harshest possible sentence imposed. And the way they're going to be able to do that is to prove that these different kidnapping groups have operated as a criminal enterprise. That then introduces an act known as POCA, the Prevention of Organized Crime Act, which has far more serious sanctions than most common law offenses would have. One must also remember that when somebody's kidnapped, they're going to use stolen vehicles. They're going to use stolen firearms. There's going to be an assault involved. There may be a shooting involved. So there's a whole array of charges. So the minimum I would anticipate a person involved in a kidnapping syndicate in South Africa would be sentenced to would most probably be in the region of about 15 years if one takes into consideration the other related crimes. And that could go up as high as most probably 25 years. But remember, under South African legislation, we have to make sure that the minimum sentencing is imposed and that there's a ruling made by the presiding officer that they can't have parole when 1/6 of a sentence is served. Because that's a massive problem we have in South Africa at the moment. People get to serve sometimes only 1/6 of their sentence.
And I'm hoping that in the sentencing of these kidnappers, that their assets are frozen, and that the state can then, dissolve those assets, and possibly even the victims and their families can get back possibly what they've lost.
So that's the beauty of POCA. If they can prove it's a criminal enterprise, Chapters 5 and 6 of the Prevention of Organized Crime Act allows for the property of the accused to be restrained in terms of an interim interdict, and then it becomes a preservation order. We also believe very strongly in South Africa in terms of restorative justice, and we have a victim charter. And you're 100% right. If families can receive some form of restitution, that would be the cherry on the top.
Okay, and that's where we're going to have to leave it. Could sit here all day talking to you about this very fascinating, however sad subject, because no family should be put through something as traumatic as this. But undoubtedly, we will talk with you again sometime soon. Thank you, Chad Thomas, for your insights into kidnappings and the fact that the kidnapping kingpin has been arrested here in South Africa.
Thank you, Julie.
It is exactly 9:35. Standing by to talk to us is my colleague, Appa Miriam Mia. She is the host of educational program here at Salam Media, and we're going to be talking to her about back to school. So do stand by.